Hello everyone, my name is Carolina Mercado, and this is my presentation on Nikki Giovanni, or AFAS 160. Her parents were Jones Gus Giovanni and Yolande Cornelia Watson, born June 7, 1943 in Knoxville, Tennessee. Her birth name was Yolande Cornelia Giovanni Jr., but her sister Gary Ann nicknamed her Nikki. They were raised in an all-black neighborhood in Lincoln Heights, Cincinnati, Ohio until the age of 14. Nikki Giovanni and her sister spent many summers with their grandparents in Knoxville, Tennessee, and Nikki Giovanni had a very close relationship with their grandmother, and she was the one that alerted her about the problems with racism. And when Nikki Giovanni turned 14, her family moved back to Knoxville, Tennessee. After her family moved back to Knoxville, Tennessee, Nikki Giovanni attended Vine Junior High School and Austin High School, and in high school, she was exposed to other African American writers and was inspired by Gwendolyn Brooks. At the age of 17, she entered an all-black university and her grandfather's alma mater, Fisk University, in 1960. However, a year later, she was expelled from the university because of conflicts she had with the dean. However, after she was expelled, she did take courses at the University of Cincinnati and did volunteer work. In the spring of 1964, Giovanni reapplied to Fisk University, and the new dean accepted her to return in the fall of 1964. During college, Nikki Giovanni majored in history and took many writing courses. She led the reestablishment of Fisk's chapter of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in 1964. She published an essay on gender questions in the Negro Digest of 1966. And she graduated with a BA in History and Honors in 1967. She also organized the first Cincinnati Black Arts Festival, and she attended the Detroit Conference of Unity and Arts, where she met H. Rap Brown, who was the replacement for the NCC head, Stokely Carmichael. And in 1967, she moved to Delaware and attended grad school at the University of Pennsylvania School of Social Work on the Ford Foundation's Fellowship and worked in the People's Settlement House. However, eventually she did drop out of the University of Pennsylvania and continued to work in the Settlement House. So after college, Nikki Giovanni continued to associate with the leaders of the Black Arts and the Black Powers movement. After the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968, Nikki Giovanni moved from Ohio to New York to start her master's degree in fine arts at Columbia University on the National Foundation of the Arts Fellowship and a grant from the Harlem Arts Council. However, she eventually left the programs because she did not feel that her professors respected or understood her work. Because of this, she began to write her own poetry and become one of the first Black Arts Movement poets. And she was especially successful from 1967 to 1970. And in 1969, she taught at Queens College. So this is some of Nikki Giovanni's work. There's Truth on Its Way, there's Grandmothers, there's Ego Tripping, and there's so many more. Nikki Giovanni's work is bold, accessible, and musical. Also, her work is mostly based on her individual experiences rather than the African American community's experiences. And we can see this through Ego Tripping and Nikki Rosa. Also, in the Norton Anthology of African American Literature, on page 879, Nikki Giovanni states, "I write what I see, and I take responsibility for it. Why should 30 million people have to have me as a spokesman?" Her work was mostly read by the African American community, and her first 3 volumes of poetry were Black Feeling, Black Talk, Black Judgment, and Recreation. Also, side note, Black Feeling, Black Talk was a result of her seeking refuge from the most significant losses of her life, her grandmother. Later on, she created Truth is on His Way, and she made that into a record with a New York gospel choir. And it wasn't her last record either. So Nikki Rosa, like I said, was one of the poems that really demonstrated her individual experiences in the 1960s. And I really like this poem because it talks about her childhood, and some of the common themes about this poem is that money isn't everything, and happiness can be found in the simplest of things. And one of the most important lines that we can find in the Nuns Anthology, page 882, she says, I really hope no white person ever has cause to write about me because they'll never understand black love as black wealth. And they'll probably talk about my hard childhood and never understand that all the while I was quite happy. And this helps people understand and get an idea of what it was like to be an African American living in poverty in the 1960s. After completing her first volume of poetry, Black Feeling, Black Talk, Nikki Giovanni was known as the Princess of Black Poetry. Through the 1970s, her work became popular with both African Americans and Euro-Americans. And in 1973, Nikki Giovanni won the Woman of the Year award for the Ladies' Home Journal. Because of this, the leaders of the Black arts movement heavily criticized her for the award and questioned her commitment to the revolution. Also, they suspected that all she cared about was the fame, but Nikki Giovanni insisted that her selection for the award by a white organization was an indication of progress in race relations. After she had her son, Nikki Giovanni created more poetry and speeches to support herself and her son. She often made 200 public appearances a year. I think revolutionary music is one of Giovanni's greatest works because she quotes famous soul and gospel songs from the 60s, she mentions Leroy Jones and the Vietnam War, and using the lyrics, she gives her poem such a deeper meaning, and she knows that music helps us connect to each other. And it's interesting that in the Harlem Renaissance, featured in Norton's Anthology Volume 1, even Zora Neale Hurston said that she felt more advantaged to be African American. She felt like herself when she listened to jazz, because African Americans and Euro Americans did not have the same experience listening to jazz. Like, jazz was much more important to them because it meant something to them. The same goes for soul and gospel in this era. And Nikki Giovanni even says, doing a whole song they can't even snap their fingers to. And then later she says, they say I'm a fool for being myself. And I absolutely love the quote that she says later on. She says, we be digging our revolutionary music consciously or on cause. Sam Cooke said a change is gonna come. So Nikki Giovanni wrote her 12th book, Cotton Candy on a Rainy Day, on 1978. After the 1970s, she dedicated her time to writing for children and teaching English at the Virginia Tech University. In 1972, she joined the National Council of Negro Women. In 1987, she was recognized as a distinguished professor at Virginia Tech. And in 1995, she was diagnosed with lung cancer. She didn't want to go through with chemo, so she went to a second opinion and got surgery for it. So what is Nikki Giovanni doing today? She travels the world. She's still writing books and poetry. She gives speeches. She appears on TV like BET, Soul, Oprah Winfrey Show. She did TED Talk documentaries, and her latest poem was Chasing Utopia in 2013. So why should we care? So first of all, she is an amazing poet. She is a civil rights activist, an orator, a professor, an author, one of the 25 living legends. She's a single mother. She helped others to see racism in different perspectives. She helped produce a few episodes for Soul in the 1970s. She also won many awards and wrote many poems about most of the influential civil rights activists that we know today, and so on and so forth. And here is my works cited, and thank you very much.